It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first ever presidential hangout road trip with President Obama. Mr. President, we're going to be taking you on a virtual whistle-stop tour today across the country, hopping into 3 different Google Plus Hangouts with groups of Americans who have questions for you. And I should tell our viewers at home that neither you nor any of the members of your staff know which questions are going to be asked today. Our team here at Google chose these participants from amongst thousands of questions that were submitted online. Mr. President, it's become a great annual tradition for you to speak to your fellow Americans on Google Plus and YouTube after your State of the Union speech. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us.
Well, it's great to see you, Steve. Thank you so much for helping to set this up.
Well, we're excited. Let's get right to it. We're actually going to start in the western part of the country today as we begin our journey across America. And here in the West, we're joined by Art Hernandez, a data tech in Tempe, Arizona, Steve Hamilton, a documentary film producer in Santa Clara, California, and Sheila Chung Hagan, who works for the Public Utilities Commission of San Francisco. Sheila, let's start with you.
Happy Lunar New Year, Mr. President.
Thank you so much.
You've called 2014 a year of action where you'll work with Congress when it's possible, and you'll use your executive authority when Congress fails to take action. You've asked Congress to pass a comprehensive immigration reform with a clear path to citizenship, and yet legislators continue at an impasse. You have used your executive authority in the past to help the Dreamers, young people who were brought to this country as children, and so I'm wondering, will you now use your executive authority to halt deportations, which have been ripping families apart, until Congress passes a comprehensive immigration reform?
Well, Sheila, it's great to talk to you, and thanks for the question. I think this is one area where I am modestly optimistic about Congress acting this year. And part of that optimism is that it's so obviously the right thing to do. Comprehensive immigration reform has gained support from all walks of American life. You have law enforcement, you have clergy member, including evangelicals that are traditionally strong supporters of the Republican Party. You've obviously got immigration activists and communities, but you also have businesses who recognize that this would be terrifically important for economic growth, short-term and long-term, would actually cut our deficits by $1 trillion. So the arguments are compelling. We saw a bipartisan bill pass through the Senate last year, and Speaker Boehner announced a couple of, actually yesterday, that he has principles for immigration reform that are moving in the direction of the principles that I had laid out from the time that I first ran for this office. There are still some differences, and obviously the devil is in the details, but it is my firm belief that we can get immigration reform done this year. And I don't want to presuppose that we can't. Obviously, if at some point we see that it's not getting done, I'm going to look at all options to make sure that we have a rational, smart system of immigration. But I'm going to do everything I can in these coming months to see if we can get this over the finish line, and I think we actually can get it done. One last point I want to make, and that is that in any scenario, we're going to have stronger border security. In any scenario, we're going to improve the legal immigration system so that families can be unified faster, that you don't have this massive bureaucracy, these backlogs, where folks may wait for decades to be reunited. In any scenario, we're going to be making sure that employers aren't taking advantage of undocumented workers and that we can enforce that. I believe in any scenario we should also make sure that at the end of the day, people are able to become citizens, because we don't want a situation in which we've got 2 categories of people in this country, folks who are full-fledged citizens and folks who are not. This is something where there's going to be some differences between the Senate approach, which does have a clear path to citizenship, and what we've seen so far out of the House Republicans. But the point I made yesterday is that I want to engage. I don't want to prejudge and presuppose that we can't close some of those gaps. I'm going to keep on fighting as hard as I can and remain, as I said, modestly optimistic. You can never be completely optimistic when you're talking about Washington because we have some history of stuff not getting done in this town as opposed to getting done. But I'm going to be pushing very hard in the next few months to see if we can get this over the finish line.
Well, let's go to Steve in Santa Clara next, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to say it's an honor to speak with you, sir. Thank you for taking the time to do this. My question to you is, last year I filmed a documentary about Chernobyl in Ukraine, and while I was there I made a lot of really good friends, and right now those friends are living under what could be considered Soviet-type rules with freedoms and such, not like a free democracy like they're supposed to be. What's our country's stance on these protests that are going on there, the Euromaidan protests, and what does the administration plan to do to assist the protesters in Kiev?
Well, we have been actively engaged in what's been happening in the Ukraine. Not only has our embassy and our folks who are over there been talking to the opposition as well as the government, but folks like Vice President Biden have spoken directly to President Yanukovych about our belief that, number one, rules that restrict protests and free speech are ultimately counterproductive, and we are very much against. Number two, that there has to be a way to restructure the Ukrainian government in a way that allows the voices of the opposition and those folks on the streets to be heard in preparation for some sort of democratic process that creates a government with greater legitimacy and unity. And that's going to be challenging, but we're trying to help on the negotiations on that. Number three, over the long term, part of what's happened here is that the people of Ukraine clearly are looking to Europe and the West as a partner in a more free market-based economy. Obviously, they also have strong historic ties to Russia, as well as a lot of commercial relationships with Russia, and those don't need to be sacrificed. But what I think the people of Ukraine do not want to see, and this is evidenced by what's happened on the streets, is a situation where behind closed doors, their aspirations for a more free society and one that's integrated with Europe more closely, that's foreclosed. And I think this is just one more example of what we've seen around the world. It's very hard for countries to engage in an old-style politics that doesn't take into account the genuine hopes and aspirations of ordinary people, because with the internet and smartphones and Google and technology and information, people want to be part of determining their own destiny, and you can't bottle up information in the same way that you used to. And hopefully those in power in Ukraine are going to recognize that, and we can get this resolved peacefully. I'm always worried about the violence, but as I said, we're engaging on a daily basis with the Ukrainian government to make sure that we get a positive outcome there.
Excellent. Thank you.
Let's go to Art in Tempe.
Hi, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I really appreciate it. I have two daughters who currently live on the East Coast, and as you might expect, I can't afford to visit them as frequently as I'd like to. So the only opportunity that we get to spend time together is through the internet on video chats, such as this one. My question today has to do with net neutrality and the recent U.S. Court of Appeals ruling almost disregarding the rules of a fair and neutral internet. I'm curious to know if you support net neutrality and how you feel about the court's decision and how that decision will impact the U.S. economy and the internet as we currently know it.
Well, first of all, Art, let me just say that's a nice Marley poster you got behind you.
Thank you.
I think I might have had that one in high school. It's something that I've cared deeply about ever since I ran for office, in part because my own campaign was empowered by a free and open internet and the ability for citizens all across this country to engage and create and find new ways and new tools to mobilize themselves. A lot of that couldn't have been done if there were a bunch of commercial barriers and roadblocks. And so I've been a strong supporter of net neutrality. The new commissioner of the FCC, Tom Wheeler, who I appointed, I know is a strong supporter of net neutrality. We live under a system in which when a court rules, we have to respect that ruling initially, but the FCC, I know, and Tom Wheeler are looking at all the options at their disposal, potential appeals, potential rulemaking, a variety of tools that they may have in order to continue to vindicate the notion of a free and open internet. And I think you can feel confident that this administration will continue to support that. There are going to be a lot of technical issues about how best we can get to that. And I know that they're still evaluating the court opinion. The one good piece of news coming out of this court opinion was the court did confirm that the FCC can regulate this space. They have authority. And the question now is, how do they use that authority? If the old systems and rulings that they had in place were not effective in preserving net neutrality, do they have other tools that would stand up to court scrutiny that accomplishes the same goals? And you can expect that even though the FCC is independent, once I make the appointment, I can't meddle in the decision-making there. Based on my conversations with Tom Wheeler before he was appointed, I'm pretty confident, and they've said already that they're going to be exploring how they can continue to uphold what makes the internet so special.
Mr. President, we're going to say goodbye to our friends here in the West. Goodbye, everybody.
See you guys.
Bye, Mr. President.
It's great to talk to you. Thanks.
And we're gonna move on to the next section of our road trip today. It's in the middle of the country, and you'll see as we hop into New Hangout that we're in the central part of the United States. I should tell you that here in the heartland, like most of the country, the #1 most searched issue on Google is the economy, and that outpaces searches for all other issues. So we're actually really going to put a focus on the economy for this part of our conversation. And to help us do that, we are joined today by Curtis Angel, a student at Southwestern Christian University who lives in Aubrey, Texas.
Hey, Curtis.
Leatrice Fullerton, a social worker in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And finally, Darnell Summer, a fry cook at a fast food restaurant in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Let's start with you, Darnell.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. My name is Darnell Summers. I'm 57 years old, and I work in the fast food industry. I have been on strike 4 times. I'm only making $7.25 an hour. I've been on strike 4 times in association with Wisconsin's Jobs Now to try to get an increase in wages and a fast food union with no prevail. My question to you is, what can you and Congress do to help people as myself in this situation survive? Because with $7.25 and we were broken down to part-time to avoid paying health insurance, we can't survive. It's not living.
Well, Darnell, I agree with you. And on Tuesday at my State of the Union, I talked about this. We've got to make sure that the economy is growing and creating jobs. We've got to make sure folks have the skills to get those jobs. But we also got to make sure that work pays. And the minimum wage in this country has not gone up in a very long time. It's actually worth about 20% less than when Ronald Reagan came into office back in 1980. And I think the one thing Americans agree on is that if you work full-time in this country, you should not be in poverty when you're raising your families. So here's what I've done myself, through executive action, I intend to make sure that anybody who's doing federal business, anybody who's a federal contractor, that their federally funded employees are governed by a minimum wage, $10.10 an hour. Beyond that, I'm working to encourage states, governors, mayors, state legislators to raise their own minimum wage. And since I made this call for a higher minimum wage a year ago, you've seen already 5 states that have increased their minimum wage. A number of cities have moved forward on a living wage initiative of the sort that you're talking about in your hometown, in your home state. So I'm going to continue to try to support those coalitions, saying it's the right thing to do. Obviously, the way to reach millions of people would be for Congress to pass a new federal minimum wage law. So far, at least, we have not seen support from Republicans in Congress for such a move. But I'm hoping that as we keep on making the arguments out there, they come to recognize that it's the right thing to do. The day after the State of the Union address, I visited Costco, a company that is hugely profitable, does huge business, is a favorite of the stock market, but their starting salary for entry-level cashier is $11.50 an hour. The fact that they're paying their employees a decent wage and benefits, that's not detracting from their good business practices. In fact, employees, they don't turn over as much because they're getting paid well and being treated well with respect. They're more productive. They're not as stressed. They don't have problems because they can't get their car fixed and get to work on time. And so they, I think, point in the direction of where all businesses need to go. And I'm also talking to companies, encouraging them, do it on your own. Raise wages for your workers. You'll have better workers, more productive workers. You'll have workers who are loyal to you. And ultimately, that'll be good for your business. And it'll be good for all businesses because if folks have a little more money in their pockets, that means they got more money to spend everywhere.
Let's go to Leatrice next in Kalamazoo.
Hello, President Obama.
Hi.
Hi. I just want to give you a little background about myself. I am the 3rd oldest of 6 girls raised by a single mother living in poverty. I was the first in my family to graduate from college, the first of my siblings to graduate from high school. I have a master's degree from Western Michigan University. I'm a parent of 2 beautiful children, and I am blind. Even though I graduated at the top of my class with a master's degree, I was out of work actively looking for employment for 3 years post-graduation before I was offered my first part-time job in the field of social work. My question to you is, what is your plan for inclusion for persons with disabilities in the workforce?
Well, Leatrice, first of all, I couldn't be prouder of you and everything that you've accomplished.
Well, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. And I know your mom must be really proud of you.
My mom is, yes.
And all your siblings and your children. It is absolutely true that folks with disabilities have a higher unemployment rate, and we've got to break down more barriers for them so that they can use all the skills and talents that they've got, that somebody like you has, and not have assumptions about what you can and cannot do, preventing you from contributing to your society and supporting your family. The good news is that more and more employers are becoming aware of this. First of all, the federal government, we have really made a big push with all of our agencies to say, what more can we do to actively recruit and employ persons with disabilities? And we have just some tremendous folks in the federal workforce who are doing top-of-the-line work every single day, and we've been steadily able to increase the numbers of persons with disabilities who are employed. But what I'm also doing is working with employers. For example, today, I met with groups of employers who had pledged to do more to hire the long-term unemployed, folks who have typically been unemployed for more than 6 months and 18 months, 24 months. oftentimes they have trouble getting through the door because the fact that they haven't been employed for a long time means they get screened out and they don't get called back as often.
Right.
But one of the employers who was there mentioned the enormous work that he's doing actively recruiting persons with disabilities, and he's got a distribution center as part of this larger corporation where up to 50% of his employees have some sort of disability. And what he said in this meeting was that this distribution center is actually 20% more efficient than any of the other distribution centers that they have, which just goes to show that if you give people a chance, they'll perform. And the key for us is to make sure that we're getting every single employer out there to, in their hiring practices, in their interviewing practices, in their recruiting practices, that they are being real intentional about what can we do to reach out to more people with disabilities. Obviously, if somebody is flat out discriminated against, they can bring suit. But you know, if you're out of work, it's hard for you to prove that you've been discriminated against, hiring lawyers, all that stuff. You know, it's not going to help you right away. Instead, what we want to do is to convince companies that this is good for their business. It's the smart thing to do. And a lot more businesses are starting to realize that.
Mr. President, we're a little tight for time, so why don't we head on down to Texas and hear from Curtis.
Thanks, Mr. President.
Curtis, good to see you.
Corporations receive tax rebates on the huge CEO bonuses paid each year, but many of their employees receive food stamp subsidies because they don't earn a livable wage. How do we remove the burden placed on the working taxpayers for these subsidies and hold high-profit corporations such as Walmart and McDonald's responsible for the subsidies that their own employees receive and hold them accountable for not paying their workers a livable wage?
Well, Curtis, obviously, one thing we can do right away, as I said, is just raise the minimum wage. That would help lift the incomes of a lot of folks. The other thing is we could close some of these tax loopholes out there that aren't really very productive and use some of those unproductive tax breaks to help fund, for example, an expansion of the Earned Income Tax Credit, which is a wonderful tool that we've been able to use. Millions of people use it. In fact, about half of all parents at some point use the Earned Income Tax Credit so that they have more money in their pockets and keep more money out of their paychecks and are able to support their families more effectively. The problem right now is the Earned Income Tax Credit doesn't apply to folks who don't have kids. And there's some Republicans as well as Democrats who say this is a dumb idea. First of all, it's not giving incentives for a lot of single folks to work the way the way it would if the EITC applied to them, and it's also particularly tough for young men who are just starting off in the workplace and oftentimes aren't making a lot of income, and they may have a child who they're not paying child support for, or they're not with the mom because they don't feel like they're making enough money, or there might be disincentives for them to go ahead and get married. So you're seeing an interesting potential coalition of Democrats and Republicans who might be willing to expand it, but you'd have to pay for it. It would cost money. And one way of paying for it would be to close some of these corporate loopholes that are out there that aren't really helping anybody.
Until we close those loopholes, could we not take those deductions that circumvent the cap in the 162M, distribute those to the agencies that pay for the subsidies for these companies, what's left over give back to the company, because nowhere in our Constitution of our founding forefathers are corporations given provision for greater or equal rights to living and breathing human citizens.
Well, unfortunately, the Supreme Court's been disagreeing with you on some things lately. That's the reason why the Citizens United opinion, for example, got applied. A lot of court rulings lately have treated corporations as persons when it comes to various rights. That takes us probably into a whole new set of conversations that I suspect Steve doesn't want me to wade into. But thank you, Curtis, for the great question.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. President. We have one final hangout for you today in the East Coast over where you are. Before we head over there, let's say goodbye to our friends in the middle of the country here.
See you guys.
Bye, President Obama.
Bye.
Try to stay
Bye,
warm.
everybody. Mr. President, we head over to the East Coast for our final hangout of the day. We're really pleased to be joined by 3 new participants here. First, we have Rob Page, who works in the solar energy industry in Portland, Maine. Riham Osman, a program assistant at a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. And finally, Rebecca Stewart, a proud mother of 2 in Covington, Kentucky. Rebecca, let's start with you.
Thanks. My question regards Obamacare, which I think probably has a general consensus right now that the rollout perhaps was premature. I'm probably not the only one who's had really a panicked experience lately trying to figure out if my 10-year-old son can continue with his specialist or not. And I know that I cannot keep my plan, which I liked. But as I'm trying to decide what to do going forward, I've spent weeks with days on the phone getting confidently delivered wrong answers, conflicting information, and it's becoming quite obvious to me that a lot of agencies, almost everyone I've talked to, is having a lot of trouble figuring out the new rules. So I'm afraid that perhaps average Americans who haven't had the time or ability to do the legwork that I've been able to do are perhaps going to be blindsided by this. And I'm wondering, my question for you is, what are you doing to fix this or simplify what seems to be such a complicated process?
Well, Rebecca, first of all, it sounds like you were in the individual market, so you already had some sort of insurance plan, and so your concern is in terms of this transition, how does it affect you and your kids? And what I'll do first right away is make sure that somebody out of here, this White House, calls you directly, and I promise you, not only will they be confident, but it'll be the right answer.
Thank you. I need that.
But more generally, what we've been able to do, and you don't have to pussyfoot around, the rollout was a problem because the website wasn't working properly. I will say that in all these big programs, whether it was the prescription drug plan or Medicare, every time this happens, there's a big country with a lot of complications and millions of people involved. There are going to be some glitches involved. What we have done is, first of all, the website's working, healthcare.gov. The first place for folks to look to see whether they qualify for a tax credit, whether they can get cheaper insurance through these exchanges, is to go to healthcare.gov, where you do not have to wait anymore. And generally speaking, for the majority of people, certainly if you don't have health insurance, this will be a good deal for you. If you already have health insurance, for the majority of folks like you who do, Rebecca, typically your prices will be lower or comparable, and you will have better health insurance because the insurance companies won't be able to drop you when when you need it most. There aren't going to be lifetime limits, so that suddenly you find yourself with a huge bill at the end, and you may qualify for tax credits. If, though, after you look at that, it appears that you still are going to have a tough time, or if you have a particular specialist and you haven't found that specialist in the network of the exchange that's offered in Kentucky, then we are looking at rules to make sure that somebody who's actively being treated, for example, can remain with their specialist for the duration of their treatment. And that's what I'll try to provide more information about. For people who are generally watching, who have very specific questions like this, Rebecca, we have set up helplines, and what I would suggest is that everybody who's listening, if you have a particular question around this that is not answerable over the internet through healthcare.gov, call up one of the call centers. And in the case of the state of Kentucky, they've got a pretty good operation there. Call up them and find out what exactly your problem is, and hopefully you'll get a good answer. But you, Rebecca, since you're talking to the president directly, will get, I guarantee you, a firm answer by the end of the day.
Yes, and I have called Kentucky.
All right, Mr. President. We're going to go to Riham over in Washington, D.C., just given how much time we have left. Thanks, Rebecca. Riham, let's hear from you.
President Obama, surveillance is an issue that's really important for me, and I'm really glad that you mentioned it in your State of the Union address. In the speech that you gave a couple weeks ago, you stated that you are making certain reforms to NSA programs to ensure our privacy and our civil liberties. From the NYPD spying on Muslim communities to revelations of the NSA's surveillance program, a culture of distrust and suspicion has developed among Americans towards government and law enforcement. So what are you doing to regain the trust of the American people?
Well, Riham, even before the State of the Union, I gave a pretty comprehensive speech about the NSA. I'm pretty sure it can be found on Google, so pull it up, and because I won't be able to go into all the details here that I did in that speech. But here's what it comes down to. First of all, the NSA and our entire intelligence community, by law, is prohibited from engaging in surveillance of U.S. persons or people in the United States, even if they're non-citizens, without a court order. That's always been true. That continues to be true. The second thing that people really got concerned about was the collection of all these telephone calls that are made into one single database that the United States government was holding. It was only being accessed when you had evidence of reasonable suspicion that you had a phone number associated with a terrorist network and you wanted to find out who else was being called. And generally that doesn't affect the overwhelming majority of the American people. But folks, I think, legitimately raised a concern. If all those numbers and all those phone calls are being held in one place, isn't that potentially subject to abuse down the road? And I announced that we would reform that program so that the U.S. government wasn't holding this data while still being able to chase down leads when we have a potential terrorist attack. And in the next 60 days, we are going to get a report back from the NSA and the FBI about how we do that. In the meantime, that database will not be able to be queried without a judicial approval, just like any other warrant. More broadly, though, we also have surveillance outside this country. And what I've done in an unprecedented way is say we've got to protect the privacy rights not just to people here in the United States, but everywhere. And if you're an ordinary person, wherever you live, you should have some assurance that all your information is not somehow being gathered and sifted through. And we've set up rules to do that. But trying to find this right balance is difficult. And the one thing I will say, though, Riham, is as somebody who cares deeply about not only our Constitution and privacy rights, but is very proud of our tradition that all persons are treated equally under the law, including Muslim Americans. I've got to tell you that pretty much uniformly in every single interaction that I've had with law enforcement and the intelligence community, they are very mindful that any kind of discriminatory actions are going to be dealt with severely. We don't have a lot of patience for that. Look, is it true that there are terrorist cells that are operating in Muslim countries? Absolutely. But what I think everybody in my administration at least understands is that our best defense against extremists is a strong Muslim community working with us and not being viewed with suspicion. And that's the attitude I think that pervades this administration and will continue to pervade this administration as long as I'm president.
Thank
Mr. President, we have time for thanks, Riham. We have time for a quick final question from Rob in Portland. Rob?
Hello, Mr. President. This is about the coolest thing ever. I've been given a chance to ask you one question, and out of a million that I'd love to ask you over a beer, you know, somewhere, when I thought about it, I kept coming back to this same article that I read a while ago about how presidents age extremely, just a lot faster than every other person in the world ages. You know, they show pictures of people, of the presidents before their term and end of their term, and some of them, even just 4-year terms, they end up looking 20 years older. And you, my friend, are looking particularly distinguished. I mean that in the nicest way possible. But in all fairness, you've earned every gray hair you've got on your head, I have to say, by far. But you're expected to be superhuman when in reality you are nothing but human. And so my question is very simple. From one man to another, from a father to another, an American to another, just like you are, how are you? How is life treating you? How are you happy? And
That's a great question,
is everything
Rob.
good with you? Is everything good with you, man?
We should have that beer because I think this might take a longer answer, but I am pretty happy. I got to tell you, and the main reason is because I've got this amazing wife and two unbelievably terrific daughters who are growing up a little too fast, and I don't see them as much as I like because they're always hanging out with their friends these days. But that keeps my life in perspective. A great family. We're healthy. Obviously, I can support that family, and they're doing fine. And that's where I start, and that's my baseline. And I have dinner with them every night at 6:30 during the week, and I catch up with them. And for all the challenges I'm dealing with, that's always home base. But the other reason I'm pretty good is that this is an extraordinary privilege, this job. It is really hard, and it's long hours, and there are a lot of things flying at you all the time. But every single day, I wake up and I have the possibility, the opportunity of making things a little bit better for somebody out there.
We maybe all appreciate that.
Maybe making sure somebody has health care who didn't have it before. Maybe it's making sure that a small business gets a loan. Maybe it's helping to get a school instituted an early education program so the kids are getting a better start. And there's a big government. It's an ocean liner, so sometimes the changes you want don't happen as fast as you'd like. Sometimes the government will screw up, and since the buck stops with me, I have to look there and say, well, how do we screw that thing up? And we got to go in and fix it, and that can be frustrating when you got effectively 2 million people who are working for you. At any given time, somebody may be screwing up out of a couple million folks. But every single day, though, you just realize it's pretty lucky to be able to serve the American people this way. And when I travel outside of Washington, or when I have a chance to have a chat like this, I'm just reminded of how many wonderful people there are in this country. And as I said, the State of the Union, the economy is improving. Things are getting better. We are well positioned, better positioned than any country on earth to make this 21st century an American century. For me to be a part of that's a pretty good deal. And my wife, at least, still thinks I'm pretty cute, even with the gray hair. I just want you to know.
Yeah, you're looking great, man. You definitely are.
All right, man.
Thanks very much, man.
Thank you, Rob.
I think that's all the time we have today, Mr. President. Thanks a lot for joining us on behalf of all of us here at Google and YouTube, and of course everybody who joined us today. This has been a lot of fun. We'd love to do it again with you real soon. Take care.
Steve, I had a great time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mr.
Bye.
President.
Thank you.
See you guys.